topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, a diversity educator, and your host. If you're interested in learning about the courses and classes I teach to help people identify patterns of bias that are harmful to others and themselves, you can find examples of what I do on my website at knowwhatyouwantcoaching.wordpress.com. And in every workshop or class I teach, we learn not only how to begin to recognize more and more of our implicit biases, we also see choices and develop new pathways to cultivate more inclusive ways of thinking, being, and acting, which makes life better for everyone. So tonight we have a wonderful guest, Ro Mott-Smith. Please come on out, Ro. I wanted to introduce you while you're here on camera with me.
Hello.
Thanks for making time to be on tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I met Ro at Davis. California has a wonderful weekend where people can tour local artists' studios in town. And I walked into Ro's and it just was fascinated by what you've developed. You have some samples in your background for anybody who's able to view. And I wanted to first read your introduction and then start the conversation and so people can hear more about you from you.
Sounds good.
So Ro, I got to read it from my phone and there we go. Ro is a mixed Mexican and American non-binary artist based in Davis, California. Their art draws on themes and practices from both of their cultures to create new art forms and designs. They create vibrant, complex pieces made from cut paper and ceramics. Most of Ro's skills and art style come from lots of trial and error rather than formal education. They embrace color, nature, and humor, and they hope their work makes people smile. It sure makes me smile.
Good. Oh, I'm so happy.
So I have a couple of questions, which since you mentioned in your bio, there's a mention of formal education. Would you like to share what you were and are formally educated in before you shifted to your focus to art?
Sure. Yeah, I had a very winding path on the way to get to art. So I was an engineer previously, a scientist and engineer. I have a background in physics. Then decided that I didn't want to pursue physics as a career. Ended up working as a grant writer for a little while, as a teacher for a little bit as well, first grade teacher. I had done a lot of work towards my teaching credential and then decided I wanted to go back to school, got a master's degree in material science, and then worked for 12 years as an engineer, and mostly in the clean energy space. And then it was only about 3 years ago that I started working on art more full-time. At the time, though, I was also working a full-time job. So 40 hours a week on a regular job, 40 hours a week on art. And it was a lot. It was exhausting, frankly. And then about a year ago, like 13 months ago now, decided to make the full leap into art full time. So I still have a side job that I do for a few hours a week, but mostly I'm trying to make art pay the bills.
Fantastic. That's a lot of formal education.
Yeah, a lot of formal education, just nothing in art.
And I love your point about trial and error. Isn't that a great way to learn?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that you have to become comfortable with. I think, well, just as a person, but definitely as an artist, is for everything that comes out well, there are so many things that come out poorly. And that can be either like a specific design, or I'm trying a new technique, or I'm trying a new color, or whatever it is. And it's just so many things don't work. But the trick is just being able to look at something critically and say, okay, what about that didn't work, and how can I learn from it? So yeah, lots of trial and error shaped what I do now.
So one thing that was interesting when I was able to visit your studio, which I wasn't expecting, was that you showed me and other guests in the room how you create, because what I could see were like this richness and, like you said, complexity, and just really draws your attention in. But I didn't realize there were like layers and layers and layers of paper. And I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, the Papel Pic-Arte.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I
And
call
please
my
tell
work
us about that.
Yeah, I call my work Papel Pic-Arte. I had started off several years ago making more traditional papel picado. I'm sure a lot of listeners will be familiar with that. It's kind of the punched tissue paper, cut paper that's often used in garlands for a lot of celebrations around Dia de Muertos, but just around parties too. So people will probably have seen it, even if they don't know the name for it. So I started off working with that medium in tissue paper, and ended up migrating over to cardstock because it was much more stable and I could make more complex designs, but I was still doing single layer work. And then eventually kind of thought, well, what happens if I put one layer on top of another? And then started creating layered designs. And at that point, I felt it had diverged far enough from Papel Picado to deserve its own name. And I actually didn't come up with the term Papel Pic-Arte. I ran an Instagram survey that was like, hey, y'all, I think I created something new. I haven't seen anyone else doing this. What should I call it? And that was somebody's suggestion, and I really liked it. I will note for listeners that it is spelled, the Pic-Arte is spelled PIC-ARTE. It's the portmanteau, but it can't be all one word because that means to poke. So it would be like, poke, I'm poking you with paper. So yeah, a little bit of a spelling thing, but it deserved a new name, and I was really happy that somebody suggested that.
That's great. And we'll mention this again towards the end of the show, but for listeners on the radio who can't see the banner that has your website and your Instagram, can you just say those out loud now so people could remember and look later if they're driving in the car listening to the video?
Yeah. My Instagram is at romotsmith.art, and my website is romotsmith.com, and that's just RO. A lot of people think it's ROE, just RO.
And Mott has two T's.
Yes.
MOTTSMITH.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for explaining Paper Picado as well. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, you had mentioned the different layers. I was wondering if maybe we can bring up one of the pictures of the finished work, and then I also have some pieces that I can hold up and show you how they all come together. Yeah, so this is one of my newest pieces. I call this one Self-Care Sunday, but you can kind of see for listeners, it's the image is of a skeleton in a bathroom, a pink bathroom surrounded by a ton of plants. But what is maybe a little bit harder to see is that each of those separate elements is just cut paper layered on top of each other. And so each color is a single sheet of paper. And so I have to figure out how to connect one piece over in the left lower hand corner with another piece over in the right upper hand corner, and make sure that there's no floating pieces that would then get lost as I try to assemble them together. So that's one example. This one is called De Ti Para Ti. I originally made this one for a show whose theme was Flores para ti, or flowers for you. And the piece translates to of you for you. And this one was inspired by a conversation with my parents. Oh, and sorry, I should say for listeners, it's a skeleton lying in the ground with roots surrounding it and then flowers growing up above the ground. And this one was inspired by a conversation with my parents. They really want a natural burial. And I really liked the idea that instead of placing flowers on a grave, they could grow their own flowers. So it would be of them for them, as long as I was there to tend to them, to weed them, to water them, to make sure that they were getting everything they need. They could grow their own flowers. So that's where this piece comes from. And I actually have the layers of this particular piece, if I could show them up too. Yeah, so each of the colors is just one layer. So for example, all of the dark pink, it just looks like kind of blobby when you have it together. And then, the middle pink color also looks a little bit blobby. It's starting to get some details, and then you get a little bit more detail with the light pink, but they still don't really make sense altogether. But each of them shares a 10-inch by 10-inch frame. And as you start lining up the frames, the images start coming together, and you start building the pieces on top of each other. So yeah, that's how they come together.
That's nice to see the demonstration of that. And that's amazing that it came out of a conversation with your parents, and how beautiful that you honored it by creating this. And it looks like, oh, that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, I think oh yeah, sorry. I think that's really a nice thing to be able to do as an artist, is to take, especially things that might be hard conversations, and take them into making something that's both personal and relatable or universal. Like, not everybody wants a natural burial, right? But I've had so many people who've seen that particular piece connect to it and feel moved by it and tell me that they relate to it. And so I really like that was something that came out of a very personal conversation. It's not easy necessarily to talk about end of life with people around you and what people want. But it made me really happy that resonated with other people as well.
Nice. That before Rebel, our engineer, puts up your next, do you call them pictures, or your next piece?
I call them pieces. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just remembering that you had a piece that I think was a self-portrait. Mm-hmm. That was just really striking. And I think, is that one more like has fewer colors?
Yeah, so the self-portrait was just a single layer. I still do some single layer stuff as well. Yeah.
Okay, do you want to talk about the next piece now?
Sure, yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, this one is just it's rather than a rectangular frame like most of my pieces, this one is a circular frame, which is much harder to assemble. But it's just depicting multiple layers and California poppies, which is always a nice, I feel like it's such a great state flower, and so many people love it and relate to it. So this one just makes me happy.
How many sheets or layers are in this one?
That one has, this is one of the simpler ones. It only has 4. So I think I get up to 10 layers, at which point I'm kind of reaching the limit of commercially available picture frames. They're meant for one picture and a mat and the glass. And as I add more and more layers of cardstock, it gets a little tight to close the frame sometimes. So if I want to do more, I'm looking at much more custom framing, I think.
Shall we continue going through the pieces?
This one is, I call this one Wren Song. It's a picture of a black and white bird on a blue background with a starburst, and then out of the bird's mouth, you can see like a weaving, winding gold song. And for me, I really liked this. I love that wrens, and this is also some symbolism that I had talked about with my mom, that that wrens are they're just these tiny little birds, but if you hear one, they make such a huge noise. And I really liked that something that takes up a really small physical amount of space can be really powerful and impactful regardless of its physical size.
Wow, what a great thing to emphasize. That is a really...
The next one is, this is just a raven. I like to ask people if it's a raven or a crow, but I already told you the answer. And then I like to tell people, like, how can you tell? So I'm a pretty big bird nerd, so you'll notice a lot of birds in my work. But this is just like a single layer, very lacy, very finely cut raven that takes forever to make. But yeah, big bird nerd, you'll see that carried through.
Well, speaking of taking forever, how long did it take to cut that one? How long did it take to make the raven piece?
Yeah, so I use a combination of machine and hand cutting. So when I do the originals, I usually do those by hand, and then I'll make multiples, and with the multiples, I'll do those in a machine. With the machine, it still takes over an hour to cut this piece out. By hand, I honestly didn't keep track of the hours, but my guess is something like 20. Like a long time.
Yeah. And do you have to set the machine? You have to always like adjust the measurements for every little cut for each piece?
Yeah, it's actually quite straightforward as long as I've fed in the design. Just kind of put the dimensions in and the design file and let it go. You do have to babysit it a little bit, but it's very good for making sure that each piece doesn't cost $3,000. I really like that being able to do a combination of hand cutting and machine cutting makes things more affordable. That's one of the things that's really important to me is having art be accessible. And I'm very much drawn to folk art for a lot of reasons. And one of them is because of its accessibility, both in its creation and its consumption. So it's meant to be made by everybody, which I really love. A lot of times people can get intimidated by art and think, oh, I'm not an artist. But there's so many forms of art that are supposed to be made by everybody, that are supposed to have a lot of different voices, that are supposed to have a lot of different styles. And Papel Picado is one of them. I feel like Papel Pic-Arte could be one of them. And at the same time, so that's on the creation side. And then on the consumption side, folk art usually isn't going to cost the same as a giant oil painting, right? And I'm not knocking giant oil paintings. I love those too. But not everybody can afford something that might be hanging in a museum somewhere. So I really like that folk art is it can be such beautiful craft, and that it's more people are able to have something that's meaningful to them and have that in whatever space that is theirs, and look at it and smile at it every day.
That's true. I remember you mentioned before you feel like folk art sometimes is not considered real art and that it's underrated.
Yeah, I think it gets knocked a lot. I think if you look at who has traditionally been hung on museum walls, it's not often folk art, and it's not often non-European art, although things are changing a little bit. But I think we also have a tendency to maybe underappreciate the things that we see and use every day, like they become regular to us, which could be another reason why folk art doesn't get the same platform as what people consider fine arts. But I think there's something really special about the utility of something and the everydayness about something, and that doesn't take away from its beauty.
Have people asked you if you would teach them? Is this something that you've been asked?
So I do workshops. I do workshops for kids. When I do kids, it's more like collage style. So I will cut out a bunch of different things for them and then they'll assemble it. So they still get to do layered cut paper. But I don't necessarily want 20 kids all using X-Acto knives at the same time. So it's like a safer way
Yes.
to have kids involved. And then I will be teaching a class in June, at the end of June, for adults at the Artery in Davis. And that will be the layered paper cutting workshop, as well as one in Mountain View in October. So if listeners are excited about learning how to do cut paper, I do workshops every once in a while.
And they can, do you list them on your website, or can they contact you through your website?
Yes, yeah, they can contact me through my website or through Instagram. And then as they get scheduled, I will post them on my website as well. Sometimes some of the dates are not quite set yet.
Great.
And also, if listeners run organizations and they'd like to host a workshop, I'm always open to doing those as well.
Like can you give an example, like for an organization staff or?
Yeah, I've done some for like a private group before. So like a friend group party or someone has suggested doing one for their immediate team at work. I've also done them mostly for community groups. Like, for example, some of the kids cut paper workshops were for Dia de Muertos celebration in East Palo Alto last year. So it was a big community event, and there happened to be a grant for sponsoring an artist. So I got to do a workshop with them. But so yeah, everything from private groups from like 5 people to community groups of 50 people. I'm able to kind of tailor workshops to what people want to see.
Well, I was going to ask you, because I also saw you at a Davis Arts Alliance meeting, and one of the people there asked you, Dr. Melissa Marino, who teaches ethnic studies and does so much other amazing things for our community, asked you if you would be a part of the Dia de los Muertos this summer in Davis, which was great. We'll see what evolves there. But did you grow up with celebrating Dia de los Muertos in your family?
I did, yeah. So I'm mixed Mexican-American, Mexican on my mom's side. And my great-grandmother was from Oaxaca, which is the region in southern Mexico that I would say is probably most known for the Dia de Muertos celebration. Like, it's not exclusively there, but they tend to go all out. And so I was raised where we would make an altar every year, and we would make little things to go on the altar. We would put it on our pictures of the people that we had lost and their favorite foods. And it was something that we would do as a family together. There were also some traditions that I thought were common that it turns out were just things that my grandma did that I thought were like, we would make these tiny little figurines, and they would be of you would make them out of construction paper, and then their heads would be garbanzo beans, and you would like draw on the face on the garbanzo bean so it looked like a skull. And I thought that was just like a common tradition, but I didn't know a whole lot of other Oaxacan families and growing up. And so it wasn't until I got older, went to college, met more people, and they were like, no, that's just you. So sometimes there's cultural traditions, and sometimes it's just family traditions. But yeah, we grew up doing that as a family. When my great-grandmother died, it ended up, we still did it, but not as consistently. And now I'm the one of the family who mostly carries that tradition. Like, my mom and my sister really appreciate it, but generally don't make their own altars. And so, yeah, I feel like it's kind of my role in the family to keep that tradition going.
That explains the skeletons in your pieces.
Yes. Heavily influenced, yeah.
Yeah, and that the first one was the skeleton was in a bathtub, like relaxing, and it's so interesting if you don't know about that holiday, how it can be like, you can wonder, why a skeleton, but that explains it. But do you
Yeah.
want to say more about that? Like what else do skeletons, why do you like to add skeletons to your pieces? What else do you want to say about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think so some of it is related to Dia de Muertos holiday, but I think there's a larger tradition of using skeletons in art in Mexico in general. Like there's the paper mache work of the Linares family, or a lot of people might be familiar with the lithography of Jose Guadalupe Posada, who did like the really famous Katrina, the skeleton in a big hat, or the
Hmm.
skeletons riding bicycles.
Yes.
And a lot of that has been used, like skeletons have been used as a form of satire or political commentary or just commentary on everyday life in Mexico, like year round, not just necessarily confined to the Dia de Muertos holiday. So I feel like that's where some of my tradition comes from too, or why I carry skeletons into my artwork. And for me, it's also just a good way to kind of address some universal experiences. Like we're all just bags of bones in our little meat sacks doing stuff. And I just like thinking of us as our skeletons, and it kind of puts a little bit to me of like a little bit of absurdity into the work. Like it's just a skeleton hanging out in a bathtub, and that seems absurd, but that's what we do. That's what we're all doing. So I like carrying that tradition into my work as well.
It's true. And also it made me think as a viewer, I was like like a little humor, like, oh yeah, like that is what's underneath, and we are mortal. And
Exactly. Yeah.
it may as well take a hot bath while you're still here in your in your meat body.
Exactly.
May as well enjoy life while we're alive, and
Yeah.
because. And what else do you see? Like you said, you're a bird nerd. We talked a little bit about the skeletons. Do you have other recurring themes and other pieces? I see lots of plants,
Lots of plants.
flowers.
Yeah. Lots of plants and flowers. Here up on the screen is another one. I call this piece descanso. It's a pink skeleton in the middle of a room full of green plants. And this one's just kind of, descanso means a rest. And this one is just like a reminder, stop, sit, breathe, look around you. And I think that's one of the things that draws me both to birds and then just to plants in general, is being able to step outside of yourself and your own experiences and just watch something that is having a completely different existence than you are. And there's just something really powerful about being able to recognize that there are many, many different ways to be alive. And my particular experience is just one of them.
I love that one. The pink skeleton sitting in a chair. I don't think I've ever seen a depiction of a skeleton in that position, like sitting up in a chair observing.
Yeah. And then some of these are just are inspired by my own life and connection to flora and fauna. So for example, the one that's up on the screen now is some hooded orioles in an orange tree. And that is straight up just, I used to have an orange tree where hooded orioles used to like to stay. And I just really liked the color combination where it was the bright orange and bright green and bright yellow and then black and white contrast. And then of course that wasn't enough. So I had to put a hot pink background in my piece as well. But I just loved the colors. And that was one of those things where I was just sitting watching them every day and wanted to make a piece about it.
That is so cool to just like take what you see and create something else based on it. That's
It's an interesting trying to. I feel like there's challenges in trying to depict something as it is in a very confined and defined art form, right? Like I have a limited amount of colors that I can use because the paper comes in a limited amount of colors, and I have only so much detail I can get into with shapes. And so I think there's some challenge in that. And then there's also a challenge kind of in the more abstract, a different challenge in the maybe like the self-portrait piece or the Pic-Arte, the skeleton with the flowers growing from it piece, of trying to take an idea and translate that idea into an image. So I think, I kind of go through two phases. One is the I see that, I like it, I want to make it. And one is that I'm feeling something, how do I make it look visually? And so they're both challenging. I don't have a set process for either. I don't know how they get from A to B, but I like doing both.
That's cool. I mean, it's cool that you don't know how, you know, that it's organic and probably different, I don't know, every time or sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that we had talked about was one of the reasons that I don't necessarily have a set process is because I don't feel like creativity works like that for me. And creativity is not, in my opinion, something that you're born with or something that you innately have. It's something that you foster and you grow through a lot of discipline and work, honestly. At least for me, I'm not just walking and think, oh, I have an idea for something, or having a conversation with somebody and, oh, I have an idea for something. For me, I mean, that happens occasionally, but for me, most often it's, well, I'm sitting down at my table. I am playing with paper. I am trying different forms with my X-Acto knife. I am layering different colors together just in sheets. And I'm trying something, and I'm trying another thing, and I'm trying another thing, one after the other and after the other. And creativity comes from giving myself the space, both like the literal time and the brain space, to try to just explore. And the more I work, the more ideas flow. So for me, it's like creativity is a discipline. I have to sit down. I have to work every day to be able to have the ideas come.
And how much time when you sit and you go to work, does that usually last a certain number, a minimal number of hours, or does that vary?
It totally varies. In terms of like how much I spend at a time, or how much or like how much time before I get a good idea.
So it varies in both cases.
Oh yeah, both cases. Yeah. So I try to have large chunks of time when I can focus. For me, that helps better than context switching from one thing to another thing. Like if I can dedicate a whole day, that's better than dedicating 2 half days for me. And so, and I can hyper fixate on things. So I will sit in my chair at my desk, forgetting about everything else for 12 hours at a time if I've got an idea. And then in terms of like how long it takes to get an idea from playing around, that also varies a lot. Sometimes it's a couple hours, sometimes it's several weeks or months. I've definitely gone through periods where I just feel like I'm not creating anything that I like. And then one day that will change and it'll start tumbling out and I'll have a bunch of ideas.
Do you ever find, like, I'm just thinking about writing, like draft after draft after draft, and the first 2 or 3 drafts just completely go out the window? Do you find you literally throw things away, or do they end up coming back and being incorporated or changed so much that you have to scrap it and start over?
Yes to all of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I have some designs like the skeleton in the bathtub, the self-care Sunday one. I probably went through 8 different iterations of that before I landed on the design that I liked. And so that one was, and then even once I landed on the design that I liked, I played around with colors and how to get the exact right composition. But yes, so sometimes I will come up with something and then it'll be like, oh, I just need to tweak it. I just need to tweak it a little bit more. I need to tweak it a little bit more, and it'll eventually get there. And there are also things that I totally scrap and end up in the recycling, and I never return to them. So some ideas just aren't ready for prime time.
So I know you also encourage other people, like, to just do art. Like, can you like say more about that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think sometimes, like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about folk art, I think art can be intimidating. And it's a shame because it's so much fun. And I think sometimes there's this mental block to getting yourself to do art. I know I've experienced that. But one of the things that I really like is with my art form, and I think with a lot of things, you don't need a whole lot to get started, right? So for the Papel Pic-Arte, you need a blade, a piece of paper, and a cutting mat, and that's all you need. There are some forms of art that are much more intense. Like I'm currently embarking on a ceramics journey, and that has a lot more overhead. But there are a lot of things that you can do with with very limited materials, and I think that is really encouraging. I'm always really inspired when I see people using recycled materials or just a pen and paper, or you can create using pretty much everything that you have. And I'm always really inspired when I see other people do that as well. So I just like to encourage people to just look at what you have, and is there anything that you can do with that would feed your soul? Because art is it's really fun and therapeutic. And I hope that anyone who wants to be able to make art has the opportunity to make art.
Yeah, that's kind of cool how you just kind of defined art as just make something with what you have. That's fun. Like it doesn't have to be a particular thing.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes that constraint even can help you figure out what to do, right? Because also sometimes, you go to an art supply store and there are thousands of different options of what to choose from. And it can be also overwhelming that way. And so if you just look at what you have, it's almost like you can plan a special meal and go to the grocery store or the farmer's market or wherever you get your food and get every ingredient on the list. And that's one way to do things, and that's great. But you can also just say like, oh, well, I have beans and spinach and rice. What am I making tonight? Like you just see what you have. And sometimes that set of constraints can make it a little bit more manageable because your options are narrowed down and you don't have as much like choice fatigue. I don't know what the right word for it is, but
that's good.
But some of the I guess it can be intimidating to start because you might think that you need a lot, and then it can also be overwhelming to start if you have too many choices. So just figuring out like what you have to start with can be a good entry point.
Did you do art? Like, did you play around like when you were growing up, like before you went to go study engineering and physics? And were you a doodler or a weaver or crochet, anything like that growing up?
Yeah, I did a lot of art. We hadn't talked about this, but my mom is an artist. She's a ceramic artist, and I grew up playing with clay in her studio, and for some reason never saw that as a career path for myself. I don't know why, but she also really encouraged us to do a lot of whatever art we wanted. So I did things with acrylic paint and clay and pen and paper, a lot of doodling, but I had never made the connection in my head that, oh, I really love this. Maybe this is something that I should do with my life until a couple of years ago. But yeah, always had the opportunity. Was very lucky to have the opportunity when I was younger to play.
That's great. And did you grow up bilingual?
Yes, I think I grew up more bilingual than I am now. I think it's hard living in a household where, because my dad didn't speak Spanish. And so, when my great grandmother used to live with us for part of the year. And so then, the things are kind of divided, right? You're always leaving somebody out of the conversation. And so it can be kind of hard. And I think once I left home, I stopped speaking Spanish as much. So I would classify myself as semi-bilingual now, but grew up more so.
Okay, semi-bilingual, but you still speak two languages.
Yeah. I would say my Spanish has gotten worse over time with less practice. So that's a goal, is to feel more comfortable. I think it's one of those things that also I'm sure a lot of people might be able to relate to, of not feeling like you're enough of one thing because of this deficit or perceived deficit that you have, like, especially as a mixed person, sometimes I feel like I'm not taken as seriously as being, of Mexican heritage as well. And that is just compounded by not speaking my language very well, or not speaking one of my languages very well. And so I think that's something both that I have to come to terms with, of just accepting, my own cultural identity, regardless of what other people might think. And at the same time, I want to be better at speaking Spanish. So it's kind of a goal for getting better.
That makes sense. Do you have much connection with, do you go to Oaxaca? Do you have much connection there now?
I just went in February. I don't have any family that lives there anymore, but I just went to go visit a friend. And it was lovely. It was a really interesting experience. I hadn't been there for about 15 years when I went back. And before that, it had been like another 15 years. So I haven't been very frequently. But it was interesting to go there as somebody of Oaxacan descent who was born and raised in California, and to both feel that some things were very familiar and that some things were very unfamiliar. And I had kind of an experience that I'm still processing, of trying to understand what can I claim as my own and what is not for me as somebody who, wasn't born and raised there. And so I think that's something that I continue to grapple with, of, what traditions do I feel like I can be a part of? Do I feel like are partially mine? And what traditions do I just say that's not, I have no claim to that. And so that's been complicated. I'm not speaking about it very well because I haven't processed it fully, but I think that's maybe something also that other mixed people might be able to relate to, that of that feeling of both like familiarity and home, as well as being a little bit of a stranger at the same time.
Yeah, I know, I really appreciate it as someone else with mixed heritage. I appreciate even that level of articulating that. It's a lot to process. And in that February visit, did you take some of your art there?
I didn't, but I took art classes when I was there, and that was wonderful.
Wow.
I took a woodblock printing class, which is like a really, really big part of the art scene there. And it is very hard. I feel like my hands are pretty strong, but my hands got real tired carving the little wood blocks. And then I took a ceramics, a hand building class as well, which was great. It's very, very different from what I grew up with. But it was really interesting to see them actually make the clay. Like, I go to a store and I buy my clay. And so it was really interesting to see like how much labor goes into the part of the process that I wasn't really familiar with. And also what their different techniques are. They use very different materials, different firing techniques. So I was really happy to get to, that was another one of those things where like the art itself is familiar, but the process behind it is not something that I grew up with, is not part of my personal, family traditions. So I really loved being able to take those classes while I was there.
And how I know I keep going back to the engineering training, like how much do you think that influences your art?
Yeah, I get that question not infrequently, and I never know how to answer it. I think it mostly helps with my, like, the logistical side of art, not necessarily influencing the art itself, but I am great at keeping track of, material cost and expenses and program management and all of the like more logistical parts of things, and finances, which wasn't actually part of my engineering job, but I think can sometimes relate. I actually think that my arts, my love for the arts influenced my engineering more than the other way around. And being able to see patterns and see sequences of putting materials together actually helps being an engineer.
Wow, that's interesting. Your love for art influenced your attraction to engineering.
Yeah. I had someone, I remember a very specific example where I was laying out a process for somebody, and they look at me and they go, "Oh, are you a manufacturing engineer?" And I said, "No, I just quilt. Like I know how to quilt, and so I know like how these things should be put together, and I know like the math that needs to be done." And it was like I'm not a manufacturing engineer. It's not the same thing, but I think people oftentimes think of science and art and engineering, they're like as separate, and there's all this controversy whether it should be STEM or STEAM.
Right.
And I just think there's more overlap than people often give credit for.
Clearly, as you demonstrate. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure you have time to sort of add any thoughts before we get to like your closing thought or other things that maybe encourage other people. Or also, I remember you sell cards too, like boxes of cards, right, that people could buy that are reprints of your pieces. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I sell prints as well. That's another way to make things more accessible. The cut paper is much more intense than the pictures of the cut paper, so hopefully
Yeah.
make that a little bit more affordable for people as well. But yeah, I sell cards and magnets of my work as well, and then who knows, might expand to more things. But right now, everything is of the original cut paper design, and then pictures from that.
And they can see them on your website, I'm guessing?
Yes, yeah. Thank you for thank you for reminding me of that. They are on Instagram. A lot of the cards are on my website. All of my Papel Pic-Arte is on the website. A lot of my cards are. I don't do a great job at website maintenance sometimes, so I'm a little bit behind. But for
Okay.
listeners who are in Davis, all of my work is also at the Artery in Davis. You can also find it at the Crocker Art Museum gift store in Sacramento, at Crow Boutique in Long Beach, and at Art Space on the Coast in Pacifica. You'll be able to see all my work in those places.
So how did you how do you spread the word about your art? Like how do you get into all those places
Yeah.
from your
Um,
experience?
yeah, I think part of my experience is just being a little bit annoying and going places with samples of my art. I had someone gave me this advice which I really liked, which was you can give away some of your art. So I have these packets of my cards and magnets and a bio of myself, my contact information, all of that, that I just drop off places. And sometimes that works out. And so it's mostly just a very terrifying step of putting yourself out there and opening yourself to rejection. That is one thing I will say for people considering a job in the arts is it is so much rejection, so much rejection, but you just kind of have to be okay with that and move forward. Because sometimes then things do end up working out.
Well, we still have a couple minutes. That's such a good point. Like how do you, this might sound really silly, but how do you deal with the rejection? Do you just say, okay, not here. This isn't the time. I mean, what do you say to yourself, or how do you just keep going and being a little bit annoying to other places?
Yeah, I think part of it is just part of it is really difficult because generally they don't give you any feedback. It's just a no. It's not a no because.
Right.
So that I think makes it harder to deal with it at one point, but also a little bit easier because you just say, well, I'm just going to keep doing this because no one's telling me it's bad. They're just saying no. And so I think part of it is also then realizing that my art is not for everybody. And when somebody says no, it's a no for them, not a no from everybody. And so being able to separate each rejection is not a reflection of my particular work as a whole, but just what that one person might think.
That's great. So we probably have like 45 seconds if you want to say closing thought, and then I will get to thank everybody.
I don't have much of a closing thought. Thank you so much for having me. I guess my closing thought is make art that makes you happy or is meaningful to you and helps other people, yeah, just use your art for making the world better.
Wonderful. And that's rowmottsmith.com or at rowsmith.art on Instagram. Thank you, Ro, so much for being here. It was wonderful hearing about your work and seeing examples, and I hope people go check it out. And I also want to thank our engineer, Rebel, and our producer, Dean, and all the listeners and viewers. And please tune in next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time to W4CY or Talk 4 TV. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate